So today we're going to talk about how to knit a hat in the round, and there are 4 different ways you can do that. So the first way is 16-inch circular. Now this can be either a fixed circular like you see here, or it can be a set of interchangeables, but they have to be our short interchangeables to make it 16 inches around. Or you can use a longer circular, which can be also fixed or interchangeable, and that can be 32 inches or longer, and 40 inches might actually be more comfortable, but 32 inches works. And the third way is 2 circulars. So that can be any 2 circulars, which we'll show you how that works, but any 2 different lengths will work fine. And the fourth way is DPNs, which are double pointed needles, or you'll see them in patterns written as DPNs. And those are long, straight, or long or short. These are the longest, and they can come shorter than this too. And they're straight, hard needles with no cables or cords or anything, and they're points at both ends. So you can go around from one to the next. Now the easiest way for the body of a hat is the 16-inch circular, because you can just go around and around in a circle. But when you get up to the crown of the hat, it gets too small. The circumference of the stitches becomes smaller than the circumference of the needles, so you can no longer knit around and around, and you'll need to switch to one of the other 3 methods for that crown as it comes in. So it's a good idea to just watch how to do all 4 of the methods, and then you can try some out and see what you like best and know what your options are. Okay, so I knit off all the stitches from that old needle, and now they're all around the 16-inch. So you can see how the needles just fit scrunched up around there. So there's no join or anything. I'm just going to knit around and around. And when I get to that stitch marker, I know that that's the beginning of my round for following the pattern. And just slip it across and keep on going. And that is how you use a 16-inch circular. And then as you decrease the crown, assuming you're knitting a bottom-up hat, the crown will decrease in. And when your stitches become smaller than the needle, it'll become much harder to knit, and you'll know that it has become too difficult and you need to switch to a different needle type. So at that point, probably at the beginning of the round, you would pick up another needle, either a longer circular or another circular or a DPN. We'll learn all those techniques, and just start knitting the stitches back onto the other circular or needle, and then you'll do one of the other techniques. So the next technique that we'll learn is the magic loop technique. So I'm going to knit all these stitches back on to the longer needle, and when I get all the way around to the other side, I'll show you the magic loop technique. So now we're going to learn the magic loop technique. Magic loop sounds fancy, but it's really not very fancy. It's a pretty simple technique. You'll need a circular needle that is at least 32 inches long, or 40 inches might be a little bit easier. This is 32 inches. And for any small circumference or the crown of your hat, you're going to need to do standard magic loop technique. This is the full body. You can do it for the full body or anything smaller. You're going to divide your stitches in half, and it doesn't have to be exactly half. There's no need to count your stitches, just approximately, fold it in half and pull a loop between 2 of the stitches. Just grab it between any 2 stitches and pull the cable. To pull a loop of the cable out between the stitches. Now on the other side, push the left-hand needle in to knit. That's the side you're going to knit into. But pull the right-hand needle out. Now because this is only 32 inches, I'm risking pulling this loop out, which I don't want to do. I want to keep this loop here, but also pull this out, so it's easier to kind of scrunch it up a bit. So what I want is to have 2 loops across from each other, 2 magic loops. So stick the needle in to knit the first stitch, like this. So the yarn is going across from the one side to the other, and pull it snug. And now I'm just knitting normally, So what I'm doing is I'm knitting straight across the first side, up from the one loop to the other loop. So I'm knitting half the stitches just straight across. So I'm just going to do that right now. Okay, that was the last stitch on the left-hand needle up until the loop. So when I knit that stitch, the needle kind of flopped out here. So that used to be the loop, but now it's the needle. And now I have that loop on the other side, halfway across. So I'm just going to turn, keep that loop right there where it is, and pull on it to stick this needle now into the stitches, the left-hand needle into the stitches, and pull the right-hand needle back out to make another loop. So once again, I have the two loops across from each other. And I just do the same thing, just knit across, straight across these stitches, the other half. So you just do half and the other half, and back and forth, and around. So that is magic loop with any circumference on long needles. Now, with a hat body like this, when it's as large as a hat, there's another method. So you can do something that I've heard called traveling loop or half magic loop or lazy loop. I don't know if these are all regional or just vary by person, but basically you don't have to do the full half and half back and forth. When it's as long as this, you can pull out that other loop, stick the left-hand needle in, pull out a loop for the right-hand needle, and just knit around with one loop only. So I'm going to show you how that works. Basically, you don't have to divide it by half, which I like a little better, but not everyone prefers this. A lot of people prefer regular magic loop, especially if you have a longer needle. So try them both and see what you like better. So with this way, you pull the right-hand needle out, you leave that loop there, pull the yarn straight across, knit that first stitch, and then I'm just going to knit all the way around the entire round, all the way around. And you need to kind of slide the stitches around the needle as you go. So I'm just going to do the entire round right now, and you can see how that works. So now you see as I'm working my way around, the loop is kind of traveling closer and closer to the end of the stitches, so it just traveled all the way around. So I'm just continuing to knit around. I'm on these last 3 stitches before the loop. And the final stitch. So there I have just this loose left needle now, because I made it all the way around. So now to knit the next round, I just knit one whole round. Now I pull the right-hand needle out and push the left-hand needle in. I'm ready for my next round. And with this method, what I like about this is you can make this the beginning of your round point, so you don't need a stitch marker. You might have other stitch markers, but this can always just be the beginning of your round, so that way you're just knitting one full round from beginning to end, and you always have that loop in the same place. But if you want the loop to be in different places, if you stop, sometimes you stop knitting somewhere else, and then you go like this to throw it in your bag, and then just start knitting there and put the loop there. So the loop doesn't have to stay in the same spot, it can just be anywhere. So that is magic loop / traveling loop, half magic loop, whatever you want to call it. The next technique is 2 circulars. So I'll be using both 32-inch long circulars, but you don't have to. For the 2 circulars technique, the needle points, the needles themselves need to be the same size, of course. So you get the same gauge all the way around. In this case, I'm using 4 squares and round needles, so they look different, but they're the same. But the length of the cords can be any length, it doesn't matter. I mean, long enough to fit your stitches, but if you use 2 16-inch, that should be fine also. So what I'm gonna do to set up for that method is knit half of the stitches. And this is just approximately half. When I say half, I don't mean you have to count exactly half. It can be just approximately half. Onto the other needle right now. So I'm just going to do that right now to set it up. So now that I have these next to each other, I'm realizing I was wrong. They are different lengths. So one is 24 and one is 32. Again, it doesn't matter. They can be any length. But it is good and recommended for your needles to be different here, your 2 circulars. So I'm using one Sunstruck and one 4 square because they're very obviously different from each other. It's recommended that you use different colors or different types or something, because then it's easier to keep track of which is which, or different cable colors too. The needles can be the same if the cables are different. Anyway, that's what I have going on here. So to do the 2 circulars method, you're basically going to knit 1/2 across one needle from the same needle onto the same needle, and then you're going to knit the other half on the other needle from the same needle onto the same needle. But you're going to go around and around with the yarn traveling in a circle. So put the needle that's ready to knit into, the yarn is right here, so I'm going to knit in these stitches, and I'm going to put the needle into the stitches ready to go, and then I'm going to grab the other end of that same needle. So whatever needle is in the stitches, that's the needle I'm going to knit onto. I'm going to grab the yarn from the other side, pull it across, make sure it's pulled snug across, and just knit across that half. So this is very similar to Magic Loop right now, where I'm just knitting half of the stitches across in a straight line. I'm just going to do that right now. Alright, so here I'm reaching the end of that first half. I also happen to be reaching the end of my yarn, so ignore that. So I've knit across that first needle. Now I can pull it out and just let it sit loose on the cord, because now I'm going to turn and knit across the other half of the stitches across the other needle. So I'm going to pull the left side of this needle, well, depending on the non-working side of this needle that I'm going to knit onto. I'm going to push this side into the stitches that are ready to be worked. So the yarn is right here. It should be longer than that. And I'm going to pull that across and just knit from the same needle onto the same needle, same as I did before. Yeah, so that's the 2 needles method. You're just going to knit across needle A, across needle B, just back and forth, around and around. And that's all. So the final method is double pointed needles, or DPNs. Now to do DPNs around the whole body of the hat like this, you're going to need a full set of 5 DPNs that are 8 inches long, so that all your stitches can fit all the way around. If you're only using them for the crown when it's a smaller circumference, then you can just use 4, so there'll be 3 around and then 1 working, or you can use shorter ones if you have shorter ones. So for this one I have a full set of 8 inch long. And so you'll divide your stitches into 4 parts. Again, it doesn't have to be equal parts, just 4 generally approximately quartered parts. One join can be your beginning of round. If you have pattern repeats, you can try to place the joins where the pattern repeats are, whatever works for you. So you're gonna knit from one of your needles where the yarn is onto the empty needle. Again, you'll just pull it across. Now this, for all these methods, 2 circulars, Magic Loop, and DPNs, when you're knitting from one needle across onto another needle, you want to make sure you pull that yarn tight. Maybe just give it a little extra pull after you knit the stitch to make sure you're not laddering where your stitches changed. Laddering is something that can happen where the needle joints happen, especially if the needle's always changing at the same place, then you can get like a little separation between stitches at that place if you're not careful, or it looks like a ladder. So you want to avoid that by making sure you're pulling tightly across from one needle to the other, no matter what technique you're using. So I'm just knitting from one DPN onto the next, across a quarter of the stitches. Then when I reach the end of that needle, last stitch, I end up with an empty needle. Now these stitches are on this needle. I just turn, do the same thing, take that empty needle and knit the next quarter, pulling the yarn across. You just do that all the way around. Now some people prefer DPNs all the time instead of circulars, so you might be one of those people if you try it and you like it. It might just be easier for you to just use DPNs all the way from the bottom up to the top, and not have to worry about any circular cords at all. Now speaking of the bottom with DPNs, cast on, which we haven't talked about, with all those circular methods, when you cast on, you'll just cast onto the circular and then kind of divide it up as needed. And with DPNs, I'm usually lazy and I just cast on directly onto the DPNs, but it can be a little tricky to cast on and kind of break up your cast on between needles. So what you can do is cast on onto a circular, so you have that whole cord, and then join it around and knit the first round onto the DPNs, dividing it in quarters. So knit a quarter of the stitches, then the next quarter, the next quarter, onto the DPNs. You can always knit from any needle onto any other needle if you want to switch techniques partway through. If you're using one technique and you decide maybe I like a different one better, just knit onto that other needle type at any point in the hat. You can try them all. Now you know all your options for knitting hats in the round.